The Contradictions of the 16 Types. ESTP. Undisciplined but focused. I see ESTPs as the archetypical rogues of the world, people who don't have much of a plan, but somehow turn up and opportunistically make the best of a given situation before moving on to the next one. Despite this going hand in hand with a certain level of directionlessness, it also comes from one of their main strengths, their ability to focus on and laser in on what is happening right here and right now. This is something that they themselves might not even recognize as a skill that they have because it's so natural and automatic to them. It's only when you compare them with other people and other types that it becomes very noticeable. So rather than casting them as unable to concentrate on one thing for a long time, you could say that they are constantly concentrating on the here and now. It's just that the here and now is continually changing. Therefore, they'll be focusing on different things from moment to moment. So in that sense, being distractible doesn't necessarily mean that you are unfocused. In some ways, you're focusing on too much. ISTPs. Flexible, yet rigid. ISTPs are one of the most adaptable types. They are quick learners, but perhaps more importantly, are rarely caught off guard by chaotic and intense situations. This agility of mind, and often of body too, if they are that way inclined, means that they are very hard to fluster or get the better of. They can be quite cat-like in their switching from lounging around to pouncing. However, they're also very stubborn and tend to resist, forcefully and aggressively, any attempt to be pushed around or strong-armed into something. So they're both fluid and adaptable, yet stubborn and rigid in one very compelling package. ENTP. Energetic dynamos, but lazy as hell. ENTPs can appear quite random to others in pretty much all areas of their lives. I think this is especially true when it comes to their energy levels. When their insatiable curiosity is triggered, then all other things can fall by the wayside, including eating and sleeping. Then, in other moods, no amount of convincing or coercion will kick them into gear. They can be mercurial indeed, and the divergence between those two sides of them can be quite stark and shocking to people observing them. I think this contributes to why their success often seems very natural and effortless. People might be seeing the lazy side of them or the chilled out side, but they don't see the other side that is willing to invest huge amounts of energy into a project or work. ISTJ. Down to earth, yet idealistic. ISTJs are seen by many people, rightly, as realistic and pragmatic people with their feet firmly planted on the ground. Rarely prone to flights of fancy, they can seem sometimes dry and overly attached to what currently is as opposed to what could be. However, I think that people often forget that they are naturally principled people with strong attachments to particular values. If the people around them, or even society at large, moves away from certain values and beliefs and principles, then ISTJs can come across as deeply idealistic and even innovative. There is a cyclical element to what is valued in society at any given point, so ISTJs can fluctuate from seeming like they are rigidly upholding current standards to suddenly being iconoclastic and heretical, depending on the times they live in. ESTJ. Cold but caring. I think tough but fair would also work, but that seemed too generic. Despite their well-earned reputation as disciplinarians who can, at times, treat people like they are cogs in a machine, that machine, or system, or procedure, is always designed to help the people using it. Yes, it is important to invest emotionally in relationships, but if the foundations of a relationship aren't stable, then in the eyes of the ESTJ, it's fundamentally doomed. Although it can be difficult at times, whenever an ESTJ is pointing out what you could be doing better and more expeditiously, it's coming from a place of care. They want to set up the lives of their loved ones for success, stability, and security. INTP. Intelligent but childlike. I think someone like Albert Einstein is a good example. He's often typed as an INTP, but he's useful to use to explain the point, regardless of whether he is or not. He's someone that at any point could be pondering the deep mysteries of the universe, yet you get the sense that at the same time, he couldn't really look after himself very well and required a certain amount of adult supervision. This is the duality that characterizes them. A curious combination of intellectualism and, dare I say, naivety or even innocence in other areas. They can master the life of the mind, but sometimes struggle with the life of the, well, adult. ISFJ. Humble but proud. ISFJs are understated, under-the-radar operators. Rarely in your face, boisterous, or obtrusive. Definitely not the types to be listing off their achievements. They're happy to adopt a supporting role and shine the spotlight on other people. However, when it comes to them being in a position of needing to receive help or asking for help, A certain level of pridefulness comes out. It can feel quite unnatural for them. As a result, they might have something of an I can do it myself philosophy to a fault. They're a type who are never going to try and one-up you or play some kind of power dynamic or political game, but they do value being in that position of strength. After all, when other people in your life are more dependent on you than you are on them, it's quite a strong place to be. It's a powerful position to occupy in people's lives. So although they will very rarely flex, they still like to maintain and retain that position of strength. ESFJs. Giving, but needy. ESFJs are typically quite selfless people when entertaining and giving to others, hence their reputation as the archetypical hosts of the world. This can create an inevitable imbalance where they're constantly giving more than they are getting back in relationships. It's like the people in their lives get too accustomed to a good thing, to being treated well. That can create a void where the neediness for reciprocation intensifies. So this might be less of a duality for them and more of a cycle they go through. Giving too much, being taken for granted, or even being taken advantage of, then feeling that strong need to get the same treatment themselves. ENTJ. Liberal, yet authoritarian. ENTJs are people who live life on their own terms. They advocate for ambition, work ethic, and independence, both in action and in thought. They're extremely open-minded to different ways of living, and especially open-minded to innovative ways of solving problems. On the other hand, if you happen to find yourself working with, or more likely for, an ENTJ, you might find them to be more on the dictatorial and tyrannical end of the spectrum. They can exercise a my way or the highway approach to business and also sometimes to relationships as well. They will give you your freedom, but you might have to fight for it. INTJ. Determined yet uncertain. INTJs are, in the most hyperbolic descriptions, often referred to as visionaries. This is because they're in a perpetual cycle of planning and organizing towards whatever immediate or long-term goal they might have. They often have an exceptionally self-assured demeanor. However, this can often obscure the fact that they aren't any more confident or certain in their plans and aspirations than anyone else. In fact, the prospect of them dedicating lots of time and effort to something that ultimately doesn't work out absolutely terrifies them. They are somewhat haunted by the question of, would it be worth it, whether the path they're taking is the right one. So their relentlessness doesn't denote any more internal certainty on their part, which in many ways makes that trait of determination even more impressive. ISFP. Gentle but fiery. ISFPs are often described in terms that are warm and cuddly, which is not inaccurate, but it is just one side of them, and hides the fact that they can be, and often are, very passionate, fiery, and even aggressive. Fieriness strikes me as something that is fundamentally an emotional thing, and I think that their forcefulness comes from their SE. FI and SE in combination, that's a lot of firepower. When you have deeply held values or principles, there are going to be plenty of moments where you have to defend them and fight for them. That's where you'll see the most fierce side come out. ESFP. Observant, yet oblivious. ESFPs are a curious combination of switched on and switched off at the same time. Sometimes obvious things can fly over their head, yet at the same time, they will spot things that everybody else misses. This probably depends a lot on their mood at any given point. When they are chilling and relaxing, they don't care that much. But when they're locked in on something, they won't miss a single thing. So I would never make the mistake of thinking that you can pull the wool over their eyes. I think they are simultaneously the most underestimated type, and also the type that I would least recommend underestimating. ENFP. Extroverted, yet introverted. Just kidding. Optimistic, yet cynical. If you've seen other ENFP videos of mine, then you won't be surprised by this one. This is because I believe them to be a type strongly characterized by this duality, more than other types it seems. I think someone like Robin Williams exemplifies this. Endlessly joyful, upbeat. Whenever you see him, you're just injected with energy. Yet at the same time, even if you didn't know this about him, you can kind of tell there is a darkness underneath it all too, or perhaps even fueling it. I think another good example would be someone like Jim Carrey. A type like ENTPs wouldn't struggle with this because they're not making those kind of value judgments about things and deciding how they feel about everything. ENFPs see the same amount of possibilities, but have their emotions engaged much more often, on average. It's the burden of seeing all of the good in the world, but all of the bad as well. INFPs. Wise, yet out of place. I almost said wise but lost, but I don't think that's quite accurate. In this case, I think their wisdom is actually precisely because they often feel out of place, or sometimes lost in the world. That detachment affords them an outsider's perspective, an unusual vantage point, which becomes even more unique when expressed in their own individual way. Whereas some people can't see the forest for the trees, INFPs have a foot in both worlds, sometimes on the ground level of the forest floor, other times in their tree house, watching the comings and goings. feelings. However, even when being participants, they never stop being observers at their core. Should they wish to take their insights and share them with the world, everyone is the better for it. INFJs. Empathic yet detached. INFJs, as I've said before, are the feeling person's thinkers. This is simply because of the balance they have with their feeling and thinking functions. Both are valued and made use of in a big way by them. So you have someone who is a mixture of being very emotionally astute, yet not very emotional and emotionally expressive themselves. In this way, INFJs are kind of similar to INTJs in their detached vibe. I don't think it's unusual for friends or people who are close to INFJs to see them as trusted recipients of their feelings and even their secrets and confessions, yet not actually know that much about the INFJ. So it's that duality of receiving people's emotions well and interpreting them, analyzing them, and navigating them, yet not giving much back in the opposite direction, typically. They can sometimes be like emotional scientists, ENFJs, accepting but judgmental. I was also thinking of saying moral but enablers, but maybe that's a bit harsh. ENFJs are typically people who have a great handle on, for want of a better phrase, the right thing to do, the ethically acceptable or greatest good approach. Despite having their moral compass pointed in the right direction most of the time, they're also deeply understanding of people, including people whose moral compass might be a little bit defective at times. So they can become, how to say, like collectors of certain nefarious characters. So they strike an unusual balance between judging people for how they act, yet completely understanding and accepting them at the same time. If you haven't already, then feel free to be characterized by contradiction and subscribe, even if you don't want to. It makes a big difference to the individual video and the channel overall.